Hi, everybody. Welcome to Documentary Talk. My name is Don Payne. This is episode 2. Today we'll be discussing the documentary Rubble Kings by director Shane Nicholson. This documentary is about the 1970s street gangs in the Bronx in New York City and eventually how it morphs into the beginning hip-hop scene. I'll be having the discussion once again with my good friend Juan Castro, and he'll be phoning in from Sacramento, California. And again, if you have anything, comments, suggestions, critique, please don't hesitate to contact us, docutalkpodcast@gmail.com, or you can visit our blog, documentarytalkpodcast.wordpress.com, or you can join our Facebook page, Documentary Talk. So I think we had talked about it just a bit. It was actually the first documentary we talked about that you had brought up.
Yeah.
I asked you, what had brought it to your attention. I think you said you were just kind of scrolling around on Netflix and saw it there.
I did. Well, what actually drew my attention was The Warriors, the 1970s cult classic. And you remember when we were growing up, man, how we always spoke about that movie. It was kind of the action movie of, our time. And
we all, as kids, we talked about that movie. We, I don't know, for some reason we thought it was a really cool movie, having no idea it was actually, based on the real stuff that was happening in the Bronx in the 70s.
Yeah. What I like about it is everyone is trying to find their own identity. And there's so much different culture in New York that you really see a difference in gang culture from one street to the next. There's a difference in how people dress and how they kind of view themselves.
Yeah, and it would also, I think, for whatever reason, I remember we had our little street type gangs. We were kids, obviously, but it was actually till, I think, middle school, after middle school. It reflected a different kind of gang culture.
Yeah. And it was, we were all trying to find our own identity. I don't know. And I think that's what kind of sparked the interest, because I think of the difference, the way people presented themselves in gang culture. But yeah, with this movie, I don't know. I love how they brought, New York to life. And really what New York basically, I mean, when you look at New York, it has its own character in itself. People use it in movies as a part of the act, because it almost has a life of its own. I truly believe that the character of the city is actually in the poverty-stricken areas. That's where you really see what a city is really about and how much unity and how strong how well people come together, in a community. In the impoverished areas, and I think it just shows what it was about, and that's what that movie does.
Just the name alone, Rubble Kings, and just looking at the topography of the city as they were showing the old footage of, it was a lot of rubble. Looking back in Sacramento when we were kids, where we lived, it seemed pretty desolate at times. I mean, I recently went back, like right around the corner from where we lived, and I went to a comedy club over there, and it was just, I can see kind of the neighborhood a little ways away. Not in detail, but, I could go, oh, it was right over there. But just where I was at was just totally different. I mean, it's so much, it looked nice. And when I was a kid, I remember there was a lot of fields. There was a lot of, it wasn't as bad as, obviously the situation in the Bronx in the 70s. But it just kind of brought to mind how there was a lot of stuff that was laying around and it wasn't in very good condition, all that area. So, it looked a lot different now.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, where we did a lot of our, just stuff that we hung out and did, and just all kinds of different things. We used to do some crazy stuff.
Yeah, so, I remember there was upside down cars out there we'd crawl through and all kinds of stuff. Yeah,
I remember that too, man. Yeah, a lot of people used to throw their trash out in the field. It's a lot cheaper than going to the dump. And so, you get a lot of contractors who don't want to spend $5 on, get toss their trash. And you still have that. I just think it's, now with all the cameras and video footage, I thought the thing about, how they brought that city to life, through just kind of seeing it, how we viewed our own city, seeing it through the eyes of kids who are, struggling to survive the way we did, and just having the same kind of common problems and faces, a lot of single parents, and there were a lot of gangs. And then you kind of see how it happened.
Yeah.
And we saw this beautiful portrait in Hollywood of New York and how it looked before the 70s and how they, brought in and they wanted to bring in a new freeway and it went right through the Bronx. And that's where we started seeing a lot of, because they still did a lot of filming. And I mean, New York was basically, a lot of filming was done there in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And in the 70s, it changed a lot. And what we saw on the silver screen.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of rubble, I remember. And I see it just looked dirtier. And you just see how trashy things are.
A lot of those movies that came from the 70s and the New York-based movies, I mean, like Mean Streets, a lot of those movies had that gritty look, and New York in general looked more dirty and more gritty and more hardcore when you look at a lot of those movies that came from that time period.
And I think there was an explanation with the movie Rubble Kings. We kind of get an explanation why that all took place, building that freeway. And they went right through the Bronx and really made a lot of folks who lived there move. And then, they started demolishing all these homes because there was so much poverty there. Even those who owned the slumlords, weren't getting the money that they used to get, and they thought it better if they were just to set the building on fire and, use the insurance money. And I guess, there was a lot of even more condemned buildings because of that. Something that I think that's going on in Detroit right now.
Right.
You think of Detroit before, it used to be a nice, lean, with a really strong middle class. But now, you see a city really just decaying.
Now, some of the footage that comes out of Detroit, and I can't remember, I think there's a documentary that I watched that covered Detroit now, in today's time, and it's horrific.
Yeah.
I mean, they're, just huge abandoned buildings it's just really bad and sad.
Yeah.
That, that city is just left to rot.
Exactly. So you see that, and then you saw that in, a city or even a state not care about, when you show the people that you care about the impoverished, that you care about the poverty-stricken, then there's more pride and dignity that you're going to get out of that city and out of the population. It just seemed like, you don't care, well, we don't care. And that was the kind of attitude that started to come out from the street.
Yeah, and they interviewed, I think it was the former mayor, and he was talking about how at that time New York was in debt, and they didn't have a lot of money. And as, that project came in to build that freeway right through the Bronx, and the middle class moved out, and all that was left were, he said, the people that had the most need, for programs and things like that, they didn't have, so they just left them there. And then they're like, okay, so they're in this environment now that's been totally decayed. And they're saying, okay, well, the one thing we can do is take, is like say, this is our street. So if you're going to come in here, we're going to make sure that you understand that this belongs to us, basically. And even the police were afraid to go into those areas at that time.
Yeah, that's crazy. I guess there were murders that weren't even solved, and I mean, you wouldn't think of that today. But back then, there were just unsolved murders. People laying in the streets and they would just be sitting there, and it was almost like, you didn't even have, there was no authority, and the only authority was the gang.
Right.
You started having the gangs really become the family, because by that time, drugs started becoming a big part of everyday life.
Right.
And, when you start having drugs become a part of everyday life and family situations, that family's not going to stick together. And, you had really hard drugs hitting that society. You have nothing else. You wake up to rubble. You look outside and it's just trash. And so it's just a depressing sight when you don't have someone mentally strong to kind of show you how to deal with these kind of situations. And I think that's probably what happened, is just like what I see today, you have a whole generation of fatherless children. Not a lot of people who want to stand up to the plate and kind of take on that responsibility. And I blame my own faith, a lot of those in my own religion, for this kind of situation, because we are people. So we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to make large ones because we make these mistakes together as a people. And
we'll talk.
I got off track again.
No, that's fine. It's, sometimes it's that's the best stuff. But in any case, I want to talk a little bit about the characters in the movie. I mean, I say characters, but since we're talking a documentary, I mean, I want to talk a little bit about the real life individuals that were in the movie that were talked about. So they talked about Benji, and also I think his nickname was Yellow Benji.
Okay, yeah.
And he was kind of the spokesperson for the primary gang that they focused on, which was the Ghetto Brothers. also I think he was the president, but he was Karate Charlie.
Right, yeah.
So, Karate Charlie was the president, and he was also the one more inclined to go to battle.
Yeah.
Obviously, with the name Karate Charlie, you would think he would be. So he would, and they had an interesting dynamic. They made an interesting team because Benji was kind of the one that would talk about the broader social context, and I think he might have been back then the only one really doing that, as far as in that Bronx at that time and amongst those gangs. And then Karate Charlie was the one that was the more, hard-edged person. And so you had this interesting combination, and the fact that they became friends and led this gang, the Ghetto Brothers, and the fact that you had Benji, who he was thinking about long-term survival as far as like everyone figuring out how to make things better in their environment.
Yeah.
And Karate Charlie was necessary when they had, he was training the Ghetto Brothers in self-defense. He was an ex-military person, ex-Marine. And then they also had Black Benji, who was the one that Benji, Yellow Benji, that is, identified as really good at talking to youth in particular about peace. And he's like, oh, he's our peacemaker. And whenever we have a conflict, we'll seek resolution first. We'll send him to talk to the other gangs or whatever. And also is a good role model for youth because he had a really, I guess, effective way of communicating peace. But unfortunately, he's the one that got killed and then the whole thing almost went into a big gang war that would have, I guess, just been really severe. What did Karate Charlie say? The Bronx would have been bathed in blood.
Exactly.
Right. And that was really the most powerful part for me was once Black Benji was killed, and he was trying to establish peace, and someone didn't recognize him or something happened, and they killed him. And once word got back to Benji, Yellow Benji, and Karate Charlie was like, okay, we're going to war. And he's calling in favors, rounding up all the gangs he could on his side to go to war after the gangs that were involved in killing Black Benji. And Yellow Benji, smart. I mean, he was brilliant. I thought the guy was brilliant. He said, hey, let's go talk to Black Benji's mom before we go. Yeah. And he takes Karate Charlie over there. And that was so powerful. Karate Charlie's talking now as an old man about, I went in there proud of myself and we're going to, get revenge for Benji. And he goes, and she just looked at me and said, Charlie, my son died for peace. And then that just, and his expression and just the way it deflated his ego and everything about what he was ready to do. That was powerful. That was powerful.
And it was the fact that, and I'm not trying to change this over to religion again, but, it kind of reflects when you look at, Christ being murdered and his innocence being, murdered for nothing, and yet it actually transformed the world. And then Black Benji, or, the peace ambassador, his blood was spilt for peace, and it transformed the community. And actually, if we look at it, transformed the world, because hip hop is a big part of our culture today, and it transforms the world. And it started from all, hip hop originated out of,
the Bronx. The Bronx, yeah. And that's interesting, that connection.
Yeah.
I had no idea. And I was like, the connection between hip hop and these 1970 gangs in the Bronx and how it developed from those gangs and their resolution, that peace resolution after the death of the peace ambassador, Black Benji, how it developed in the fact that Benji, Yellow Benji, the leader, had this band and what started him, had that huge meeting, which was basically in The Warriors.
Yeah.
The movie The Warriors had that huge meeting inviting all the gangs. And that was also very powerful because he said he knew who the people were that had killed his peace ambassador, and they were sitting up there. And then they had actual footage, and you can see them just sweating because they thought they were going to get whacked.
Yeah.
And he's talking, and there's footage of him talking, basically saying, enough is enough, and we need to stop this. And all the gangs are there, and they established, everybody signs this peace resolution. And then he smartly starts inviting them to parties where they're playing music and asking them to bring their musical instruments and be involved. And then you had the DJs, and then you had, I think they even had African Bambaataa in the documentary, and all these hip hop pioneers started having these parties and people coming and they're dancing instead of fighting. And even though they had, hip hop with early breakdancing and pop, it's kind of like battling each other. But instead of fighting, they're doing it in dance.
Yes. And they competed in a form of, there was a form of entertainment that they were able to get the attention of the masses. See, they got the attention through intimidation before, but then they learned how to get the attention by entertainment. And that, you enjoy that more. When you can make someone laugh and gain their attention in comparison to intimidation is power. And women are attracted to power, but it gets old quick. But you can never stop making someone laugh. And they enjoy that every time. Exactly.
Yeah. And I thought it was also interesting because he was talking about, how they had the Puerto Rican or predominantly Puerto Rican gangs, and I think the Ghetto Brothers were, and then you had the black gangs, and you also had the white gangs and all these other gangs, and then you had this mix of people hanging out at the same parties, and I think one guy was saying, you can go up talk to another girl that you wouldn't have been able to before because she was Puerto Rican or she was black, and then and live, right? That's what he said, and live, because her gang and they couldn't mix that way, or at least not too much. And now it was everybody's mixing. And then Benji, again, brilliant, puts up the Puerto Rican flag, and I think it was the Black Liberation flag, or I'm not sure which flag it was. And he points and goes, look up there, and he has them flying side by side, and he's like, we are one people, and it's just like, this guy was thinking on a whole nother level.
Dude, he reminds me of you. I mean, he does.
Oh,
I just know he did. He totally did. That was you growing up, man. You just had you had a level head. You know what I mean? And he was speaking on another level.
That was beyond his was beyond the level head. He was not just level headed. He was,
well, I remember when I went out there to see you just one time, and you were talking about how there was a little gang war going on at the Merced, and that you had actually brokered the peace. And that, of course, it's on a smaller scale, but it doesn't mean it's a smaller thing. You know what I mean? It's still a very big thing because they were pretty violent. Just because you're in a smaller city doesn't mean these guys don't get violent. And they did, during that time.
I don't recall that specifically, but I mean, I did strive to have people get along because it was safer in the long run, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking mostly about safety.
It's funny because it doesn't matter how big the town is. As a matter of fact, I think sometimes it can be scarier and, when it's a smaller town because you know where that person lives. In a larger place, you can kind of hide. But in a smaller town, you can't hide. And people are always trying to prove their mettle, prove their worth. And it doesn't matter in a small town or a bigger town. It's just as dangerous anywhere, So, and I remember you talking about how you were broke, kind of getting a piece taken care of there in that time. And because I remember this is where I think I met your wife.
I don't know. I don't remember that, but I don't think it was her. So
okay.
Yeah, but anyway, this guy though, what he was doing was amazing, and I just thought, man, what a great well, not untold, but I certainly wasn't aware of it, and its connection to hip hop and the way the Bronx was, and the Bronx, even all the way over here on the West Coast, you hear about a reputation, and I was a big fan of like KRS-One, Boogie Down Productions, which they had this song, The South Bronx, and how hip hop started there and all this stuff. And they're always talking about how tough it was,
Yeah.
And then you had New York tough.
Yeah.
And then you had Bronx tough, right? Which is like the hardcore. And just to watch this documentary about these gangs and how that actually, it was really bad. And I can imagine, like, they were talking about guns were starting to come in a little later. So they had bats, knives, and all this stuff. I mean, obviously nothing pretty. They were carving each other up and everything else and people getting killed. But if that situation had been the guns and stuff and had come in, and I think drugs also had come in earlier on, I can just imagine the death toll that would have taken place. But luckily, because of the Ghetto Brothers and Benji and Karate Charlie and them working to try to get everybody socially conscious and get to that point where they had this crisis, and they utilized it instead of utilizing it to set off a huge war. They utilized it to say, okay, this is actually the best moment to establish peace. This message we've been trying to put across. We'll get everybody together and say,
yes,
that's it. Here's what we do going forward, and actually, really help their situation and led to hip hop, basically, right? Or at least definitely contributed.
It did. You know what's funny is, remember how, I mean, the media, it was, the violence was so bad then. It was covered by the media like crazy. I mean, they were constantly, they actually had their own show, I think. Like, there was a show about gang life, you know, there in New York. And what was to me really interesting is when Black Benji died, and they were doing a news conference, and they were, you know, the media was expecting them to come out and say, we're going to go after them, and we're going to just bathe the walls in blood. And yet they said, no, we're going for peace. And how all the media just started to leave.
He knew all. Yeah, he pointed it out, right? He used it. That was so smart. He pointed to all the people ready to go to war, and of course they didn't want to. Yeah. They're going to come out of this building, and they want to hear we're going to war. Everybody's already riled up and ready to go. So he de-escalates it by pointing to the fact that as soon as they said it wasn't going to happen, all the media started leaving. And he said, see, this is all they care about. All they care about is seeing us act like animals. And once we act like humans, then they're not interested. Let's not give them any satisfaction. Yeah. Let's not play to that.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because these guys were wearing, okay, and see, I'm not a big communist fan, but they were wearing like red stars and stuff because back then, what's the name was really popular. There was a communist dude down in South America. Castro was popular, but there was a dude over in South America who was trying to make some headway down there and start like a communist, take over the country down there. One of them, I can't remember, Brazil maybe. And they caught him, but he was really popular here in the States. And
Che Guevara?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. And so I remember seeing some red stars on there, like they were wearing, they would wear those berets with a red star. And that was, I think he kind of made that popular. But I can see the appeal towards the youth in that regard, especially poor, impoverished youth, because you see unity in it. You see them, everyone bringing their resources together to work together for one common goal. And that's what that represents. That's why I believe in socialism. But I also believe you need to be practical and have capitalism that works together. Because those two things, America has proved it, that those two things can coexist. You know, you need
we are a hybrid system, even though people don't often think of it that way or like to admit it. Yeah. We're a hybrid system. You know, we're capitalists in some sense and socialists in another.
Exactly. And so, you know, it was kind of interesting how these kids like Benji, I think he actually was, I'm not sure if it was him or it was Karate started wearing that beret, but I do believe that they believed in, you know, that kind of socialism, because when you are broke, everyone has to work together. And
Benji was talking about anti-establishment, you know, like the real enemy is the system that's keeping us down, and that's very much in line with, you know, some socialist or communist thought.
And then said, you know, we were an imperialist and we were a capitalist, and well, we are, but we're not. That's not just what we are as a society.
Yeah, but it was an interesting identity too, though, because they were also mixing it. I mean, they were talking about some of it got sparked by the Hell's Angels.
Yes.
You know, so some of the symbolism came from them, and the riding of motorcycles and the leather jackets they wore.
And you see black dudes, and this is what really trips me out. You saw black dudes. I mean, you know, you see some Mexican, but black dudes wearing swastikas on their arms. Yeah, you know, the whole ideology of Nazism is, you know, totally against black folks. But yet you see these guys, and what that proves is that when you're thinking in a violent manner, you worship violent tendencies, regardless of where they come from.
Huh.
You look at the German, just the Third Reich, that's what they called it, and how they were, you know, so violent and so wicked. Yeah, you know, it's just interesting how it's called for what it is. They look pretty wicked, you know, those Biker Kings.
Right.
But yeah, that tripped me out too. Seeing these guys wearing Nazi gear, that's my gosh, man. And that's what a lot of the bikers did.
Yeah, wearing Nazi stuff.
Yeah, bikers wore that stuff, but I don't know. I mean, you might as well just wear a KKK or something. I don't know, man.
Yeah, I think it was such a, you know, they were just snatching identity tags from everywhere, and ultimately, it's like you said, it was about trying to appear intimidating and violence, you know, that they were projecting.
Yeah.
And it was some of the you know, I don't know which gangs were doing what. You know, they said like almost every street had a gang, you know, and it was like so many gangs in the Bronx, and with all these different identities, you know, all their different colors and, you know, their names. They had really interesting names. You know, you had the Ghetto Brothers, which that one's pretty straightforward. And then you had something like the Bachelors. It's like, okay. And then you
They
had
did. They
something
started
like
getting weird. Yeah.
the Storm in 57s, or I don't know what else, it was just really
Yeah.
interesting.
The War Pigs.
Yeah. The War
There were the War
Pigs,
Pigs too.
the Nomads,
The
the
Nomads.
Black
Yeah.
Spades.
Yep.
Yeah, just a whole bunch of different ones. It was interesting.
It was interesting. It was fun though. It really was. I think I love the unity. I love the end of the story, and that's why I thought it was so awesome that we did this one, after 13, because after 13 just left you, and you just felt so sad,
Yeah.
and depressed about what we've been living, and how many of us have been kind of blinded to what's been really going on,
Yeah.
and then once but when you hear and watch a story about, Rubble Kings, and you see that, when people come together, you can change the world, and they changed the world.
Definitely.
Hip hop is so influential, and it actually has done things and jumped outside of its own music. You see it have an influence in country and, all over throughout all of music. You see a little bit of hip hop, and, it stems from that era, that time, and that place. And it's all because there was so much tragedy. Because of that tragedy, there was a positive that came out of that. I believe that you can, if there's that optimism, you have, that optimism, and you just believe that there is a bright future that can transform the world. And for me, I'm a futurist. I am a Christian, but I'm also a futurist. I believe that there's so much out there to be had. Right in our own solar system, that can help mankind to thrive. And we can identify those things. Why would we have that fruit dangling at the end of a branch if we couldn't get to it?
Right, right.
So I believe, one day mankind is going to figure out a way to get there. And I'm not sure how to see that yet.
Yeah.
I'm still kind of.
Well, what I always say is the only thing I'm sure of is that I'm not sure. And, I'm worried about the problems that we have right here, right now. And I look at it as just this kind of race between, us being able to keep going and developing positive things that are eventually going to make things better and better and better. And also our capacity to keep developing things that make things worse. And we're just, we're always creating. That's the thing. That's what we do. We're always creating.
We are.
So we create all these tools, and any tool can be used for good and bad. There's no telling ultimately, which way we'll go. I'm hopeful that we'll take our tools and do good work with it. But just like a hammer, it's very useful, but you can also hurt people. And we also create tools that do create problems for ourselves. This story, Rubble Kings, it does have that positive message to take from it, but it's also, and 13th is also an awesome documentary, but they're just different in the sense that one has a solution because it's a story that happened and had a positive solution, whereas 13th is talking about an ongoing problem that we haven't resolved yet. So it does hit you hard.
It does.
I don't see it as negative necessarily because it's just a hard-hitting documentary, and as documentaries do, they tell the truth, and it's just the fact that it's telling a story that hasn't had a resolution yet. So that's why it stays with you that way.
It does.
Whereas Rubble Kings, it's talking about a story that is pretty much resolved. Though I did notice the director, his name is Nicholson. He does have another documentary coming out, but Rubble Kings came out in 2010, and this one's called From Ruins They Rise.
Oh wow!
And it sounds like more of the story. Possibly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it says the true story of the historic 1971 South Bronx gang peace treaty that served as the basis for the movie The Warriors.
Awesome, man.
Yeah, so
I can't wait for that. Yeah.
Well, it says post-production, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's apparently there's more to the story.
I'm excited about that one. But, Mingo, I'm excited about just doing this. And, another thing, too, but I think we could even do better even.
We'll get better as we go along. I think it's all worthy discussion. There's more to be said. Yeah. Of course, there's always more to be said. We're having the discussion, and hopefully people listen, they get interested, they check it out. I think that documentaries are just such a great form of information. Yeah. It's just a form that, documentaries are great because they tell a story.
I agree.
And sometimes it's through someone's perspective, but it's just a great way to take in information and learn things in depth and in detail that you wouldn't otherwise. The hidden facts and all these interesting things, that you get to discover. And it has a visual format to it.
Yeah. It just makes it fun to do these kind of interviews. There's another one you need to watch. It is called Winter on Fire, Domingo. It's, kind of like on the front lines of a real revolution, and it's kind of neat. So go use the restroom, and I don't want to, that to be on it.
No, I'll edit it. Don't worry. That'll be the intro. As soon as I start it, I'll put that first. Yeah.
All right, brother.
Okay.
Appreciate your time.
All right,
brother.
All right, take care.